was the first you heard about decision to terminate Mark Regenweather as fire chief and as a firefighter.
Yes.
And that was when Jeff Horn came into you and told you that he had decided to terminate Mark.
Yes.
He did not ask for your advice, he just was informing you that he had made that decision.
Yes.
Despite it not being asked for advice, did you give him some advice?
I did provide some advice, yes.
And that advice was to make sure that appropriate process was followed.
Yes.
And you told him that civil service employees have a property right in their employment.
Yes, but if I can add, he was advised by his counsel that that was not the case. So he was getting two different kinds of input.
Okay, but you did tell him that, and you're the HR director, and that's your department.
And I didn't do very well, did I?
Well, you gave him the best advice you could, did you not?
Yes.
You said he told you that the termination would be handled by him and his attorneys, and that you would not be involved in the process.
Yes.
And nonetheless, you still gave some additional advice.
Yes, I kept badgering a little bit, but it's hard to badger your boss.
Yes.
But I kept badgering, and I said, there's information that I need to send to folks. And, you know, Jeff was in the position where they don't believe it, they don't need it, they don't want it. And I said, well, I gotta give it to him. And he said, okay, you talk directly to the attorney. And it was awful good of Jeff to let me do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able then to talk directly to the attorney, and I said, you have to read this stuff.
And
If I'm not doing my job unless I give you this stuff. So he said, okay, send it to me, so I sent it to him.
And what you sent them was the Peace Officers Bill of Rights.
And that was one thing, sure.
And what was the significance of the Peace Officers Bill of Rights?
That's legislation that requires a public safety officer to follow a specific process when it comes to a quote-unquote complaint against them.
Okay. You also sent them information about a United States Supreme Court decision called Cleveland versus Laudermill.
Laudermill.
And why did you give them that information?
They have a property right in their job.
And that required predetermination,
Yes.
pre-termination hearing, and inquiry into reasons, and also advising the civil service employee of why they're
Yes.
being terminated.
Yes.
You also gave them information about another Supreme Court decision, Weingarten,
Yes.
and what was that about?
That's typically for a union representation. However, I wanted to feed them everything, because there's, 4 or 5 things. These guys are firefighters, they have property rights in their job, and it's important for folks to look at that stuff.
You did not give any opinion about termination.
I did not give any opinion about termination. Directly, no, I wasn't asked, and I didn't have the facts of the case. Jeff was not allowed, or was told for whatever reason, our city administrator, that those facts couldn't be shared. So I didn't know the facts.
Okay. Civil service does require that an employee be given the reasons if he's going to be terminated.
And we went through that process, and I gave them the required civil service investigatory process, explained the specification of charges and what was required in that process. We, of course, had advised that several months ago. But as the city administrator explained, we were told that the investigation was being done through the court case, the federal case. That was the attorney's counsel to the city administrator, as I understood it. And I couldn't get through that.
And at that point, you stayed out of the process and really were no longer involved.
That's correct.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Newell. Mr. Geisler, you are not protected by Civil Service Commission procedures, are you, in your position?
No, I'm not.
So, to the extent that you give testimony that is adverse to the city, your job could potentially be on the line.
Thanks for that. I do trust that this city is not that way, so no, I am scared, but, yes, it could happen, sure.
And nonetheless, you come forward to testify truthfully to the best of your knowledge.
I took an oath.
Okay, that's all I have.
Mr. Sobel?
You now know that the advice you gave about property rights for a civil service employee or an at-will employee, that they have property rights, you now know that's incorrect.
I don't know if that's incorrect. I gave him the stuff that I read, and that says for a peace officer, I was told that it was not a complaint. Therefore, it's not germane. Now, however they decided, that's why I stayed out of it.
But
And
Laudermill only applies to
I
a
understand that.
person.
Who's the union?
Hold on a second. Laudermill only applies to a person with a property right, correct?
Okay,
Now, are you familiar with the Sieg case out of West Des Moines, a civil service case?
I'm not.
That holds that Chapter 400 does not elevate an individual to a property right in that job.
That's not what I provided them.
So not providing that may have been a mistake then.
I'm not here to say whether I made a mistake or not.
Well, you just
I'm
testified they
answering.
had a property right, which, if there's case law in Iowa that says they don't have a property right,
Okay, that's
that would be
fine.
contrary to your advice.
Okay,
And what you said was you advised one thing, the city attorney advised something differently, correct? That there was no property rights?
that's not what I specifically said. I said there was requirements and process that I said needed to be followed. The specific one was civil service. And that indeed, specification of charges had to be followed in a specific process. And that there was the Peace Officers Bill of Rights. Just so that I'm on record here, the Peace Officer Bill of Rights has to do with a firefighter, when a complaint is made, there are specific steps that must be followed. I was told that in this case, it was not a complaint, and the investigation was being done through the federal case. That's what I'm testifying to.
Thank you, Dave.
I have nothing further.
I just have a little bit of follow-up. Mr. Geisler, with regard to the specific steps to be followed in the Peace Officers Bill of Rights, have those been incorporated into the city's personnel policies, and specifically in Employee Discipline, Chapter 17 of the city's code, or not city's code, but the employee handbook?
Is that the fire department's handbook?
Yes. I can show you Exhibit M2.
This provides the process, as I understand it, under the peace officers, under the Public Safety Officers Bill of Rights, correct?
Okay. And just a couple clarifications with regard, there's been reference to the city's attorney in this process. That city attorney who was advising the city manager at the time was not Mr. Supel, who's sitting here today.
That's correct.
That's all I have.
May I have one more question? Have you had any issues with Tim Schulteis?
Oh, yes. What issues? I mean, dealing through the Human Resources Office?
Yes.
We worked through some issues, the chief and I did, yes.
Did you have any difficulties in dealing with Tim yourself?
My job is to be as objective as possible and to solve problems, so I try as much as possible to not make judgments in that regard.
Okay. So you don't know whether it was difficult or not, you had dealings with him, but you didn't make a judgment whether it was difficult or not.
A union person who is very strong-willed has certain amounts of opinions. A chief who is very strong-willed also has some very strong opinions. It was my job, and always is my job, to try to get at the best answer, what quote-unquote the truth is. And we work through that.
That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Dave.